Hello everyone, welcome back to PodBites, where we break down complex medical topics into bite-sized pieces, perfect for your commute, coffee break, or whenever curiosity calls. I am Osama AlNaser, and joining me today is Khalid Alnajjar.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited for this one.
Same, and for a good reason. Today is the official kickoff of our Research Mastery Series, made in collaboration with the Internal Medicine Interest Group, or IMIG. You know, this series is not a textbook. It's not passive listening. At the end of the series, you'll be at an early intermediate level, someone who can actively contribute to a real project. And the best way to use this series is to apply each concept immediately and keep one anchor project running in the background that evolves with every episode. But for now, let us start at the very beginning.
Like, Bismillah. Think of research as a road trip. You have a destination, which is a published paper. But at the start, you do not even know which road to take. You just know roughly which direction you want to go.
They always make it sound so simple. You have an idea, you study it, then you write, and then publish.
Come to think of it, that pretty much is what you do in a nutshell. But there's so much more to do within that.
Definitely.
You start with a vague topic. You search it, and you realize it has already been studied to death. You narrow it down, then you find out you cannot access the data. You narrow it again, you start collecting. You discover a key variable was never recorded. You adjust the question, you write, you get the reviewer comments, and you revise. You might get rejected, you revise again. You might get rejected again, and you revise again. Then you resubmit somewhere else and hopefully get accepted.
That sounds absolutely exhausting.
Well, it is exhausting, to be honest, but you have to remember that research is not linear, it's iterative, as in a cycle of going back and forth, refining the paper as you go. Going back to fix things is not a sign the project is failing. That is how it is supposed to work.
It's also important to consider which parts you actually need help with, and which parts you can figure out on your own, especially when you first start dipping your toes into the world of research.
Yeah, this is something a lot of students get wrong. They either think they need a mentor for everything, or they think they can do it all solo. The truth is somewhere in between.
Exactly. You could probably use some mentorship when choosing your study design, planning the methodology, defining variable properly, and interpreting results. These are the areas where beginners usually struggle and the mistakes can stick with you.
That's right, but it's not all that hard. You should try some things alone first, like the literature search, writing your first draft, basic formatting, and identifying target journals. Try it alone first, then get feedback from your mentor after. Soon enough, you'll gain some independence.
Alright then, let's start at the very beginning. How do you even come up with a research question?
The thing that most people don't realize is that nobody starts with a perfect research question. Nobody. You start with something embarrassingly vague, for example, diabetes complications, or asthma admissions, antibiotics use in the ICU. Very general.
So your job at this stage is to pick an area you're willing to spend time on. The precision comes later.
The most common beginner mistake is trying to force a polished question too early, and that usually just leads to frustration.
Where do these early ideas come from?
Usually one of a few places. Something you saw on a clinical rotation that made you ask why. A topic from a lecture that stuck. Word discussions. Papers you have read. Patterns you keep noticing while studying.
And here is a trick I really like. Go to the end of a published paper, at the limitations and future directions section. Authors basically leave a list of things they did not or could not answer. That is your shortcut to real gaps.
And that connects directly to the next step, which is turning that vague interest into something you can actually work with. The way to test whether your idea is specific enough is to try writing one sentence about it, just one.
Something along the lines of, in this patient group, this problem matters because of this reason, and what we still do not know is this specific thing. If you cannot get that sentence out, the topic is still too broad.
Exactly. And that sentence usually ends up being the skeleton of your entire introduction later.
Nice. Okay, so we have got our rough idea, and we can put it into one sentence. What do we do next?
Next is the very famous literature review. And before anyone panics, this is not about reading 50 papers. The goal at this stage is just to build a mental map of what has already been done.
Right, a quick scan, not a deep dive. So how do you actually do it?
You start with PubMed. Pick 2 or 3 core keywords, for example, asthma and hospitalization and adults, and apply simple filters like last 5 years, humans, and English language, for example. Look at around 5 to 10 papers, not in full depth, just a glance at the study type, the population, the setting, the outcomes, and the main conclusion.
What about Google Scholar?
It's useful for older foundational papers and for tracing citations, but PubMed is your primary tool in medical research. It is more structured.
How can you make your research more advanced though?
When you're building your search, use 3 layers. First is using simple keywords in titles and abstracts. Then, use mesh terms, which are the controlled vocabulary that PubMed uses to tag topics. And the third is using exact phrases and quotes when you need them. Combine everything with Boolean operators, which are your and, or, and not, all fully in uppercase. And narrows down your search because both thighs must be present at the same time. Or expands it more because either one can be present, while not excludes certain things from your search.
Once you find a paper that's relevant, use the similar articles and the cited by buttons to expand from there so you are not starting from scratch every time. Finally, save your best searches and set alerts too.
So now you have a stack of papers. You cannot read them all properly, so you triage. About 5 to 7 minutes per paper. Start with the abstract and intro to confirm it is actually relevant to your topic. Then skim the conclusion. Then the results, especially the tables. Then methods. Finally, you can go over the discussion, but only if you need it.
Anything specific to look for as you read?
You should have 2 questions in your mind the entire time. Is this paper relevant to what I am studying, and is it a good paper?
What makes a paper good?
Good papers have clear methodology, a defined population, specific outcomes, and structured abstracts. On the other hand, if the conclusions are not supported by the results, that means it has low reliability.
How do you know if your topic still has room or if it's already too saturated?
Well, if you find many studies, all the same population, same design, same result, it might be too crowded in its current form. But if you notice the same topic in a different population, a different setting, conflicting results across studies, or very limited local data, you probably still have a useful angle.
And this is the thing students misunderstand most. You do not need a completely new topic.
Exactly. Most publishable projects are not new ideas. They are useful variations of existing ones.
So a gap in literature could be something like, most studies are from Europe or the US and there's nothing local. Or they focus only on older adults, or the data is 5 years old. Or there is a variable that keeps being mentioned as important but nobody has directly studied it. Each one of these small details could be your new research focus.
And the way to think about your literature review is like a funnel. Start broad, narrow gradually, and end with a very clear gap. By the time you are done scanning, you should be able to answer the following. What is known, what is uncertain, what is missing, and what your study would specifically add.
So we have an idea. We found a gap, but now we need to sharpen it into an actual question.
Refining your research question means getting specific about 3 things: your population, your variable or exposure, and your outcome.
A really helpful tool to use when creating your question is PICO, or PICO. P for population, I for intervention or exposure, C for comparison, and O for outcome.
Let's take a real-life example. You start with asthma. Okay, too vague. You go to asthma admissions. It's still broad. You go to asthma admissions. Still broad. Then adult asthma readmissions. Getting there. Then factors associated with hospital readmission in adult asthma patients. Now, that is a researchable question that takes into consideration the population, intervention, comparison, and outcome.
Another nice way to assess whether your research question is too vague is to see if you can phrase it as what is the prevalence of X and Y? Or is A associated with B and Y? If you cannot, it is probably still too vague.
Once you have your question, and before you commit to it, you need to pressure test it, because liking an idea is not the same as it being doable. That is what the FINER framework is for.
Alright, so we use the final framework to determine whether an idea can actually be done. Walk us through it.
F is for feasible. Can you actually execute this with the time and resources you have? I is for interesting. Will you still care about it when the process gets slow and repetitive? And it most likely will. N is for novel. Does it add something, even if small, like a new population or updated data? E is for ethical. Can it be done with proper approval? And finally, R is for relevant. Does it matter clinically, academically, and educationally?
If your question fails significantly in any of those, fix it before you start, because pushing forward with an unrealistic project means there is a high chance that it gets abandoned halfway through.
If you secure PICO and FINER, you are aiming for publishability, which is mostly about clarity, credibility, and reporting. If your question is clear, your population is defined, and your variables measurable, and your limitations honest, you already meet most of what reviewers need to trust the results.
Before you really start the work, you need to ask yourself a few questions to see if your idea is feasible. Do you have access to the data? Do you have time to finish? Do you have a mentor? Do you know what variables you need to measure?
If you skip this step, you may start, get stuck, and unfortunately, the project dies. A good idea that is not feasible is still a bad project.
Another important step before you really go deeper into your study is to get ethics approval.
If your study involves patient data, surveys, identifiable information, or chart reviews, you need IRB approval before touching anything.
An IRB, or Institutional Review Board, is a committee that's responsible for making sure research involving humans is done ethically and safely. Usually, IRBs are found in institutions like universities and major healthcare centers.
In practice, you need to submit an application explaining your question, your design, how data will be collected, and how you will protect confidentiality. Also, remember that you cannot use data from an institution without the institution's approval. Journals ask for proof of IRB approval, and any data collected without IRB approval is essentially unusable.
Once you have your question, your feasibility sorted, and your ethics in order, now you can actually start writing. The structure every scientific paper follows is called IMRAD, with each letter standing for a section of the paper. I stands for introduction, M is for methods, R is results, and D for discussion. Each section has its own job in the paper.
Introduction serves to answer why this study was needed. Methodology answers what exactly did you do. Results are what did you find. And finally, discussion is what do these findings mean.
It's important not to confuse what information fits where. If your introduction contains numbers and results, you are leaking the results section. If your results section contains comparison to other studies, you are leaking the discussion. Each section should stay in its lane.
Here's the trick though. We actually don't write these sections in the order of IMRAD. The best order to write in is methods first, then results, then discussion, then introduction, and finally end with the abstract.
That sounds backwards, but it actually makes sense. Your methods are factual and easy to describe. Your results come directly from your data. Your discussion is easier once the results are clear, and your introduction is easiest to write when you already know exactly what your paper is saying.
Yes, if you write the introduction first before you know what you found, you almost always end up with something vague and unfocused.
The introduction has one job, and one job only, and that is to answer three main questions. What is already known? What is missing? And why does this study matter? That's it. You're not writing a textbook chapter, and it's not a full literature review.
You write the introduction in 3 short paragraphs: background, gap, and the study aim. Keeping it tight with 400 to 700 words is usually enough. If you are going over that, it turns into a textbook chapter.
What are some common mistakes?
Some common pitfalls are too much background information with no clear gap, listing facts without building a logical argument, or a vague study objective that could apply to any paper.
How do you know if you wrote a good introduction?
If someone reads your introduction and still cannot answer what is the paper trying to do, the introduction has not served its job.
The next section in IMRAD is the methodology.
I will say that the methods section is arguably the most important section in the entire paper. Even the most interesting results become untrustworthy if the methodology section was weak.
Reviewers often use the methods to check for credibility. The question they are asking is, could another researcher repeat this study exactly from this description? If not, it needs work. Your methods must cover study design, setting, population, inclusion and exclusion criteria, variables, how the data was collected, and how it was analyzed.
You should ideally write your methods while you are collecting the data, not after. Every decision you make along the way, such as inclusion criteria, how you coded a variable, how you handled missing data, write it down immediately. Otherwise, you end up with a methods section full of vague statements, like saying that the idea was collected appropriately, for example.
If your study is measuring things like depression, burnout, or quality of life, use validated tools like the PHQ-9 for depression or the GAD-7 for anxiety. Do not invent your own questions unless you have a very strong justification. An unvalidated scale immediately weakens your credibility with reviewers.
You also have some reporting guidelines that guide your methodology writing process, such as STROPE for observational studies, CONSORT for randomized trials, PRISMA for systematic reviews. You do not need to memorize them. Use them as checklists while you write, and ideally consult them at the planning stage, before you even start collecting data.
After the methods, you have the results section. The golden rule here is to present and not interpret. No opinions, no comparisons to other papers. Just write what you found, clearly and objectively.
The logical order is sample size first, then participant characteristics, then your main findings, then secondary outcomes. Readers need to know what was studied before they can understand what was found. A very common mistake is reporting your entire table in the text. Tables carry the detail. Text highlights only the most important points.
In your results section, every result you mention in the text should be to a specific table or figure. If you cannot point to the source, it probably does not belong there.
The last main section is the discussion. This is where you finally get to think out loud. Start by briefly summarizing your main findings. Then, put them in context. Compare with existing literature, explain what matches and what does not, and give a reason for any differences.
You should also include the limitations of the study.
This is important. Every study has them. Small sample size, single-center design, retrospective data, missing variables. Acknowledge them yourself, but do not just list them. Say how each one affects interpretation. Single-center design limits generalizability. Results may not apply to community settings. That is the difference between a weak limitations section and one that reviewers actually respect.
So you have to point out the weak areas of your study rather than ignoring them.
Exactly. Then you close with implications and future directions. What does your study mean in practice, and what should come next? That finally concludes your paper.
That was all about the actual text. But what about tables and figures?
Every table should be understandable on its own. Clear title, units stated, abbreviations, explained in a footnote, consistent decimal places. Similarly, figures need clear axis labels and should be readable in black and white. You should not rely on color alone.
How do you know if you should use a table or a figure?
A table is for multiple variables and precise numbers that readers need to compare. A figure is for showing a trend, a distribution, or a relationship visually. And plain old text is for a single key number that does not need a whole table. If a sentence is enough, do not make a figure or table.
And remember, do not repeat the table word for word in the text, or use figures with unlabeled axes, or show the same data in both a table and a figure with nothing new added. Each format should earn its place.
Yep.
Alright, so you have a manuscript. How do you pick a journal?
Not randomly, of course, and not just by prestige. Search for papers similar to yours and look at where they were published. That is your starting list.
Journals are not all created equal. Some are better than others.
Yeah, definitely. Journals are ranked into quartiles, Q1 through Q4, within each specific field. Q1 is the top 25%, Q4 is the bottom. For most student and early career projects, Q2 is a realistic and very respectable target. But before you even think about quartile, there is one non-negotiable question. Is the journal indexed in PubMed, Scopus, or Web of Science? If it is not, the work may not count academically at all.
So the priority order for journal selection is indexed first, right scope second, then quartile.
And watch out for predatory journals with these aggressive invitation emails, very fast acceptance, vague editorial information, and unclear peer review process.
It feels suspiciously easy. It probably is.
Before you hit submit, make sure you have everything ready. Manuscript formatted per the journal's guidelines, tables and figures ready, references cleaned up, and a cover letter. The cover letter does not need to be long. Only briefly explain what the study is about, why it matters, and why it fits the journal specifically.
And do a final cleanup pass before submitting. Typos in the title, messy references, missing sections, word count exceeded. Any of these can get your paper returned before the science is even evaluated. Always check the journal's author's instructions beforehand.
Then you wait, and what comes back is usually one of four things: rejection, minor revisions, major revisions, or occasionally acceptance.
And rejection is not unusual, it's part of the process. Good researchers do not read rejection as a verdict on their ability. They read it as revise, improve, adapt, resubmit.
When reviewer comments come back, answer every single one. Explain what you changed. Stay professional even when a comment feels unfair. A useful format is a table with 3 columns, with the reviewer comment word for word, your response, and the location in the manuscript where the change was made. If you disagree with a comment, give a short scientific reason and cite literature if you can. Do not take it personally. That format makes it easy for the editor and reviewers to see exactly what changed and why, and it genuinely increases your chances of acceptance.
Before we reach the final destination, let us flag the places students most commonly crash. Not to discourage anyone, but because knowing the hazards in advance is the best way to avoid them.
Mistake number 1 is poor topic selection. Choosing something too broad, too saturated, or too complex for a first project. To fix that, use Finder before you commit. If the question does not survive the pressure test, change it before you invest months.
Mistake number 2 is skipping or rushing the literature review, jumping straight to data collection without knowing what already exists. That usually means you end up redoing something that has been done or missing the actual gap. Quickly scanning 5 to 10 papers first changes everything.
Mistake number 3 is a weak methodology. Vague variable definitions, no validated tools where there should be, no data dictionary, no pilot. Reviewers read the methodology as a credibility check. If it looks bad, the results do not matter.
Mistake number 4 is writing the introduction first. It feels logical. It's the start of the paper, but writing it before you know what you found almost always produces something vague. Writing methods and results first, the introduction becomes easy after that.
And the biggest mistake of all is never starting. Waiting for the perfect topic, the perfect mentor, the perfect conditions. The best first project is a realistic one that actually gets finished, not a perfect one that never begins.
So we've talked all about the theoretical part, and we've built this foundation of these basic things you need to know. But where do you actually begin? Especially if you're still trying to start your very first project.
Not all study types are created equal for a first project. The 2 best entry points are a case report, which is documenting an unusual or instructive clinical case. Low complexity, no big data headaches, great for building writing skills. Or a cross-sectional study, a snapshot of a population at one point in time, using a questionnaire or existing records, feasible, relatively quick, and publishable when done well.
Some more complex designs like cohort studies, randomized trials, and systematic reviews are not impossible as a first project, but they need more time, more resources, and stronger mentorship. If you have just started, keep the design simple. The skill is in the execution, not the complexity.
The fastest route to your first publication is often joining an existing project rather than starting from scratch. Find faculty or senior residents who are already collecting data. Ask if you can contribute to the analysis or writing. You get the experience, a publication credit, and you learn the workflow from the inside.
When reaching out, keep the message short. One paragraph with your interest and a specific idea. One sentence showing you did a quick literature scan. Mention a paper you found. And one clear ask, something like, could we meet for 10 minutes to talk through feasibility? Vague messages get ignored. Specific ones get replies.
With all that in mind, here is all you need to do after this episode. Pick one area you are curious about, do one PubMed search, open 5 to 10 papers, spot one pattern, find one possible gap, turn it into one possible research question. That is it.
That moves you from I do not know where to start to I have a direction. The rest of the series builds from there. The biggest reason many projects never get published is not lack of intelligence or resources. It's never moving from vague interests to a structured action.
Research is mostly about starting, having a system, making practical decisions, continuing when it gets messy, and finishing. Learn to do that consistently, and you are already ahead of most people.
Alright, as a quick recap, here is everything we covered today.
The real research workflow is iterative, not linear. We discussed which parts need a mentor versus which you can tackle solo, starting with a broad idea and sharpening it into a one-sentence problem statement, doing a focused literature scan to build a mental map and find your gap, refining the question using PICO and pressure testing the finer, checking feasibility and understanding IRB, breaking down IMRAD and writing it in the right order: methods, results, discussion, introduction, abstract.
Presenting results objectively, discussing findings in context and acknowledging limitations in a way reviewers respect, choosing the right format for your data with either table, figure, or text, selecting journals by indexing first, scope second, and quartile third, submitting with a clean manuscript and cover letter, responding to reviewers professionally with 3-column format.
And avoiding the 4 big beginner mistakes: poor topic selection, skipping the literature, weak methodology, and writing the introduction first.
That's it for our very first episode on this new medical research series.
Thank you all for joining us.
Until next time on PodBites.